Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. I am your host, Wendy Nystrom. Today's special guest is Richard Kidd. He is the owner and president of RK4 Consulting. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Good morning, Wendy. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Anytime. You have had an illustrious career. You have worked with the UN. You have worked with the Department of Energy, the United States Army, the White House, gigantically important, the Department of Defense, and now private consulting. You have had an incredible myriad of experiences. Could you explain your background and how you got to environmental consulting and decarbonization consulting, having the background that you have?
Well, Wendy, thanks for that. I'm not sure it's as illustrious as it is a sign that I really can't keep a job for too long and or don't know what I want to be when I grow up. No, I've been fortunate throughout my career to do things that interest me and that I felt passionate about at the time. Felt strongly about public service and started out in the Army after graduate school, spent some time in the UN, and maybe we can talk about that. And then in the federal government, where I essentially focus on public sector sustainability issues, and concluded my career as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environment and Energy Resilience, which in the private context would be something akin to a Chief Sustainability Officer as well as an environmental compliance officer. So I was responsible for environmental compliance for the Department of Defense, responsible for natural resources conservation, and then both decarbonization and climate resilience for what is, arguably the largest entity in the country, if not in the free world. So really a big remit that touched across all sorts of things related to sustainability, climate change, decarbonization. So happy to talk about any of those in greater detail.
And you've done a lot. I mean, it is illustrious. Please don't second guess yourself. That is very impressive what you've done. And the fact you have focused on helping people. You always said you wanted to help people and be of service, which your work with United Nations and you've worked around the world. You've probably seen and experienced things that no one else has. And taking that knowledge and transforming it to RK4 Consulting. I mean, could you expand a little on some of the things you experienced with respect to cultures and environment?
Sure. No, so I have had a unique set of experiences, and my formative experiences around environment and sustainability occurred during my time working in refugee camps. So I was a logistics officer for the United Nations, responsible for moving primarily food, but also supporting other things like water purification and tentage and sometimes moving beneficiaries and their families. And a refugee camp is, a fascinating microcosm. It's a contained community, and a couple of things occur there. One, it's energy scarce. And if we ran out of diesel fuel, we had some very hard choices to make. Would we stop powering the water purification system and then the camp inhabitants risk, food, waterborne illness? Would we stop powering the clinics and break the cold chain on medicines, or would we stop powering some of the lights and security measures to protect the food stores and the primarily the female inhabitants of the camp from violence? So it was a very difficult set of choices when you came into this energy scarce environment. That's one formative experience, is taking a look at a community that doesn't have enough energy and power to meet its basic needs. The second was some of the root causes of conflict. So I grew up and went to West Point, was in the military, and sort of defined my worldview of conflict as a struggle between, capitalism and some other ism, fanaticism, communism, something like that. Well, in fact, you get on the ground, and in almost all of these conflicts, Rwanda, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Cambodia, Mozambique, there's also a struggle for resources, whether it was for food or water or timber. There was this inherent resource competition that fueled and expanded and complicated the conflict. So there was this economic dimension as well. And from these two experiences, working in an energy scarce environment and noting that resource scarcity was a driver of conflict, I made the conscious decision. I didn't want to be on the response side of the equation. I wanted to be on the preventive side of the equation and do things that would ensure we had a more restorative, balanced, social economic system with a range of beneficiaries, so that we would sort of reduce that inherent need for some of the inherent tensions that generated conflict, as well as avoided the energy scarcity that lies ahead of us if we remain addicted to fossil fuels.
And oh God, I mean, that's a lot to, first of all, decisions you had to make would have been heart-wrenching at times. I can only imagine that when you run out of fuel. Being dependent on fossil fuels, yes, we do want to get away from that for a myriad of reasons, primarily pollution, but also energy scarcity. If you have solar, if you have wind, that's on site. That is something that can actively generate the energy you need rather than having to ship it or truck it in. So that's important to have availability for that. I do love the socioeconomic impact you talked about, and also helping women. That's obviously important to me. Taking that knowledge and starting your own consultancy, and you worked in private consultancy before you launched your own. Obviously, you bring something very special to the table, something that other people would never have that experience or that knowledge. What is it? I know you specialize in decarbonization, but I am sure that you bring a wealth of knowledge to people with RK4.
Wendy, thanks. So in terms of a couple of unique assets, I have worked in a variety of public sector roles and nonprofit roles. And I can see, and I have an MBA. And so I can take a look at cross-sector connectivity. So nonprofit, public, and private sector. And I work to align the interests of the three. All right.
Very cool.
So if we take a look at the type of money that's going to be required to transition the globe to, a fossil fuel, more sustainable, verdant future, there's not enough public sector money. So the public sector money and the nonprofit money has to be used to catalyze the private sector investment. And so taking a look at these cross-sectoral opportunities or creating cross-sectoral opportunities, I think is one of the things I strive to do, and it's exciting. And I work with a couple of clients that are on that intersection between public and private, or between public, private, and nonprofit. So that's an exciting sort of space that I like to work in. Also, I think one thing is that whenever we talk about an organization becoming more sustainable or having a pathway to net zero, or embracing restorative practices or circular economy, underlying that is a requirement for organizational change. You have to take a look at the decisions that the organizations make, what metrics they use, what timelines they use, what are their reward structures, and what are the messaging from senior leaders. So I've worked very hard on organizational transformation inside the Department of Defense. And I think many of those experiences are relevant to large private companies or other organizations that are starting their sustainability or decarbonization journeys.
A lot of those companies probably don't even know where to begin. Talking about sustainability or even ESG, which is apparently a negative word nowadays, people don't know where to begin. And a lot of times I do bring up the fact that sometimes the greenwashing that happens is unintentional because people don't really know what to do. They have an in-house person. They say, just write this report, get it done. They don't have your background or knowledge to say, okay, this is how you do it correctly. This is how you advance your sustainability initiative without fibbing about it, for lack of a better term. And you actually, you just came back from some international travels. I'm not sure if you can talk about some of the things you worked on, but you do travel the world for your clients.
So, well, a couple of things in that statement. First of all, I'm going to push back a little bit on ESG. Yes, there is a concerted effort by some politicians to undermine ESG. But look, what is ESG? It's just information. And if anybody who's taken an economics class at you assume a couple of things about the market. And one of them is you assume perfect information. Well, we never have perfect information, but the market always wants more information. Investors and people and employees, all the stakeholders want more information about where to apply their time or money. And so ESG metrics certainly need to improve. They need to get standardized. But frankly, the market is demanding and will only increase its demands for information about corporate performance on the environment, on decarbonization, how it treats its workforce. Does it use slave labor? Does it promote women and minorities to the same degree as white men? This is all information that the market needs to make investment decisions. And the market particularly needs information about climate change vulnerabilities. And in terms of any of the ESG metrics that are out there, I think very few organizations have a grasp about their exposure to the effects of climate change. So, for example, not a case I worked on, but some colleagues worked on with a beer manufacturer who had done a tremendous amount of work to ensure that it had sufficient water and was very wise in its use of water in the manufacturing process. Terrific. Unfortunately, their long-term suppliers for grain and barley and hops did not have the same access to water. So without thinking across their supply chain comprehensively over time, this beer manufacturer was still vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So that's a little bit of a pushback on anti-ESG. Look,
hey, I'm pro ESG.
Well, whatever we see from the politicians and in the press, it doesn't matter, because there will always be this relentless march for better information in the marketplace. Okay. And that's just the way it's going to be. And companies that try to hide the information, dodge the information, are going to lose out over time. They're going to lose out in terms of investment. They're going to pay a higher cost for capital. And as we look at the generation of folks that are entering the workforce, they're not going to be competitive for the best employees. The clean energy transition, we look at all the sort of impediments to the transition. Of course, capital, money is up there, technology is up there, but human capital is right up there. And so the firms that get the best human capital are going to win. In terms of what firms need to think about, many of the large companies, the Fortune 100s, have at least an initial start on their sustainability plans and programs. They might have some science-based targets in place for greenhouse gas reduction. What you see, though, is less adoption of sustainability, of best practices in sustainability and decarbonization as you sort of get into the mid-size companies, the Fortune 500s, or even smaller, some of the regional companies here in the United States. So where do you start? Well, I think you start with thinking about what kind of company you want to be in the future. Mm-hmm. And you plan for the long term, because decarbonization is a long-term journey. It's not a 6-month or a quarterly earnings report. But you plan for the long term. You think about how sustainability and decarbonization can reinforce your corporate strategy. So if you have a strategy that incorporates and embraces sustainability, that will be better than if you're just doing sustainability for compliance purposes. All right, so you've got to integrate sustainability into your corporate strategy, and then you've got to identify what levers you have that you can make investments in or make changes. And you should take a look at those levers both in terms of cost benefit. So obviously the ones that pay back the quickest can be pulled early, so you create some money for further investments. You need to take a look at those levers that will have the greatest return for whatever your stated goal is. So greenhouse gas reduction or material consumption, these type of things. And then, what levers are going to align with your strategy and attract the workforce that you need in the future. So it's sort of a process of strategic planning, identifying where you can make a strategic planning and incorporating sustainability into your strategy. Sustainability cannot be a tag on. It has to be aligned with a core value of the organization. And I'll give you an example quickly in the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense is an organization that prepares to face adversity. And the theme of resilience, being able to overcome setbacks and recover or even prosper, is integral to the Department of Defense, whether it's a missile strike or a cyber attack or an extreme weather event. So when we talked about climate change in the Department of Defense, I really didn't say decarbonization. That's a word I use externally. I said resilience. All right. We have to be, the Department of Defense has to be resilient and capable of operating under all future climate conditions in order to perform its national security mission. So it wasn't like we were bringing in decarbonization or 7 generations of generational equality. Some of these key themes that are prevalent in the sustainability practice were not brought into the Department of Defense because they didn't align with our culture and our mission. We talked about resilience. We talked about being able to operate under all future conditions. We talked about taking care of our service members and their families and the local communities, right? So we integrated it into the value structure and the mission structure of the organization. So if you're a consumer goods company or a mid-sized city or a manufacturing entity, you have to bring it in to your organization in a way that makes sense for your organization.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, depending on what you do and what your organization said, from, let's say you're a management consulting firm, you're not going to have the same needs and wants as a packaging company.
That's right.
Everyone's going to be completely different on what your goals are, what your needs are to be resilient, decarbonate, whatever you want to call it. You have to have it tailored specifically to you. I do love the fact you hone in on the need for data. Data is king. That is the most important factor that we have got to focus on and get that granular data out there. We can no longer make assumptions. We can no longer take entire communities and just average them out. That doesn't work.
Right. No, so in the Department of Defense, we wrote a climate adaptation plan. It's available if listeners want to take a look at it. And we defined an end state, which was, as I sort of mentioned earlier, be able to operate under all future conditions. And we identified 5 major lines of effort for adaptation. And most people think of adaptation as just like infrastructure, all right, yeah. Roads and seawalls and flood control. But we actually defined 5 lines of effort for adaptation for the department. And the first was climate-informed decision-making, right? So climate-informed, data-driven decision-making across all of the key decisions that the department makes. The second was about people and equipment, all right? So we've got to make sure that we have the equipment designed to work within future climate parameters, and we take care of the people, in this case, service members. 36 degrees Celsius wet bulb is the temperature at which the human body can no longer cool itself. Oh. So we have a lot of places in the world where we're going to encounter conditions close to that. And that's just being stationary. It's not being a Marine or being a sailor on the deck of an aircraft carrier or being a paratrooper. So as soon as we add that physical activity into it, we really start to put human life at risk. So we have to start to understand that as well. So second line of effort was equipment and people. Third was infrastructure. All right. So that's sort of the traditional adaptation. Fourth was our supply chain. Yeah. The real recognition that the Department of Defense has all these material inputs, from healthcare to ammunition to vehicles to fuel. That supply chain also has to be resilient to the effects of climate change. And then finally is this recognition of partnerships. So the Department of Defense is the largest organization in the country, and we recognized very clearly that we cannot do this alone. You need partnerships, whether it's a community, whether it's broader stakeholders, whether it's startups, new ideas, technology. So I think that's one lesson for all organizations: is you can't do this journey alone. You need to find the partners that make sense and can help you.
I love the fact you mentioned the partnerships, because no, we are not in this alone. Yes, we do need knowledge from everybody and share the knowledge that you learned somewhere else, that I would learn somewhere else, that someone else would bring to the table. This is a collective effort. This is not something you can do as independent study. Pollution goes everywhere. It does not pay attention to boundaries or countries or lines. So we do have that. I do want you to talk about some of the benefits that come from our mistakes, meaning fracking. You and I previously talked about new knowledge and technology that came out. I mean, fracking, we know, not great, not a good thing. However, something actually beneficial did come out of it. And I had just learned that through you.
Yeah, no, thanks. So one of the lessons learned is, as contentious as our times are and how divided the country is and industry can be on issues, we have to stay in dialogue because there's always something to be learned.
Yeah.
Over the course of my career, I had the opportunity to testify in front of Congress multiple times. And once I had a very brisk exchange with Senator Inhofe, informal testimony about the realities of climate change. And he didn't appreciate my remarks and expressed his view about climate skepticism, sent me his book. And then he very graciously invited me to Oklahoma as his guest to take a tour of the hydraulic fracking industry and petroleum. Sorry, he invited me to Oklahoma to take a look at fracking and all of the petroleum-based industries in that state. Yeah. So I accepted his offer and I spent a week in Oklahoma as his guest, went out to these fracking sites. It's just an amazing, fascinating industrial effort with all of these PhDs wearing steel-toed boots and coveralls. And it's both force and precision and science. So it's very impressive. Fracking produces a couple things, right? It produces natural gas, oil, byproducts. It also produces data, all right? And that data from fracking about the temperatures and the structure, the geological structures beneath the Earth's surface has enabled the application of that technology, hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, to find geothermal resources that previously did not exist, were not known to exist, and we couldn't have exploited them. Now there's a number of projects underway where you use the hydraulic fracking technology to find heat, produce baseload clean power for the benefit of all of us. And so that helps the transition. So it also softens sort of the political considerations as we sort of move away from fossil fuels. What are all these people going to do? I mean, these are people who have to work on the rigs to feed their families. So if we're able to give them a transition job to next gen geothermal, that's terrific. So there's a win-win there. We have to keep our eyes and ears open, listen to everybody. There's good ideas out there and take advantage of them and find common ground.
And the just transition is very important. So when people don't understand what that means we are not going to pull somebody out of a career where they're making a lot of money, taking care of their family, and forcing them into a career path that makes little money and they can't take care of their family. It needs to be accommodating. It needs to be a just transition. It needs to be equitable transition. But also learning from each other is very important. I mean, most people would think fracking only developed anything bad. Well, here's the one good thing that came out of it. And now we can use that knowledge and that data and those engineers and those PhDs to just transition over to geothermal, because now we know we have it. And it's a great resource that's applicable to that particular area.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I think the natural gas, anyway, fracking has a mixed record, but has certainly put the United States in a much better position now than we would have been without fracking. So we're still oil dependent. And without the natural gas or oil from fracking, we would be importing oil from petrostates. We'd have less leverage with Russia, and our grid would be a lot dirtier. So there are many good things of fracking, but we have to acknowledge the reality that fossil fuel use has to decline significantly in the next 20 years.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I tell people, petroleum isn't going away. We are still too dependent on it. We have many things that we make from oil and petrol, but the reality, I mean, it is a stair-stepping transition to renewable energy. It's not over, as you said earlier in the conversation, it's not overnight. It's not the flip of a switch. We have to do this gradually to make it happen, but we do need to make it happen. We need to stop burning it at the very least, stop burning it.
So in our earlier discussions about energy and security, I mean, it's the commodities that move
Yeah.
around the globe that are the spark for so much conflict. So the fact that wind and sunlight cannot be interdicted certainly adds some national security advantages to those two technologies. Advanced geothermal cannot be interdicted. Nuclear has many benefits. There are some questions about the global supply chain
Yeah.
for the fuel sources for nuclear power, but I'm confident that those can be worked out. And ideally, we'd get to a future where the United States and other countries are not dependent or vulnerable to commodity trades and the sort of autocratic states that control those trades.
Very true. That is very important for people to focus on. We do need that autonomy. We do need that freedom. Before I let you go, though, how can people find you? Because what RK4 Consulting is doing is very important. Your knowledge base is illustrious. I'm going to use that word again. You have a base that very few people have. So I think it's important that you tell people how they find you.
Yeah. So Wendy, thanks. No, I don't have an aggressive marketing plan. I sort of go by word of mouth and LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to find me. Or of course, just send me an email at rich.kid@rk4advice.com. That's the best I could do in terms of a clever,
Clever pitch.
a clever new email address, but rich.kid@rk4advice.com.
Actually, that works nicely. RK4 advice. That actually flows very nicely. I do like that. That's pretty good. But LinkedIn is the business platform for everyone. So, please find him, Rich Kid, on LinkedIn. Richard, thank you for your time. I think what you're doing is amazing.
No, Wendy, thank you so much. This has been great. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Anytime. Guys, please, again, check out Richard Kidd, RK4 Consulting. Find him on LinkedIn. This is a knowledge base that in all the years I've been doing this, I haven't met anyone as with the background that Richard has. So please check him out. I am your host, Wendy Nystrom, Environmental Social Justice. We will check you out next time. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.